So in this next series, there should be 3 videos where we replace this armature. As you can see, the armature is burnt out between the individual column plates, and now you've got these round circles that develop. The only thing I can figure, having seen several of these over the years, is with high voltage, high heat, and that current flowing through, that it begins to eat away at the column plates over time. So this is an original Super 2 that belongs to a close friend of mine, and he bought quite a few of these throughout the early 70s, both cars and replacement armatures. And he was pretty passionate about his racing, and so what he would do was he would paint the actual arms themselves red to make it blend in with a traditional Red Devil style AFX armature. So at quick glance you wouldn't notice it, and very rarely were they taking them out to look at them. So that's how he disguised them. And what we're going to attempt to do here is try to save the windings that are on the armature because they are original, and just do a replacement. Now, if you watched previous videos where we did armature wire and plate repair, where we saved the plate, you notice that the copper windings were actually very clean, and in this case those windings were quite dirty. So what this tells me is that it's been through quite a few heat cycles over the years, not to mention all the dirt and grime that generally builds up when you use these armatures frequently. So here again you can see those pieces are burnt out. What we're doing now is attempting to heat these tabs up and try, to the best of our ability, save the windings that are on each of these 3 tabs. Now, because there's quite a bit of solder buildup, we use this solder remover braiding that will help pull up a lot of it. And then of course when we go to reattach the plate, we'll add the proper amount of solder. In this case we're trying to get as much as we can to keep it from balling up when we heat it up, and then try to gently pull those wires off. Now that we've got some of that excess solder removed, we'll go ahead and now attempt to heat these up and remove these wires, and they're extremely delicate and brittle. So the idea here is to get them warm enough where they'll release, and then try to uncoil them from the tabs. Typically I have about a 50-50 success rate with getting the wires off without breaking them, but then you also have to be extremely careful about when you go to put them back on that you don't run into the same problem, because when you attempt to rewind them around the tabs, you're pulling on them, you're stretching them, trying to reshape them to where they lay flat on the surface of the column plate itself, so you get as flat as possible solder joint so it doesn't rub your chassis once you set the armature back into the car. those are always a bit tricky. Getting the old solder off or getting it hot enough is always a bit of a tedious process. We'll keep working on them here and see if we can get them all off, and then do an assessment on what it looks like, how much damage we've done, and if necessary, what repairs have to be made to try to get this plate back together. So there, it looks like it actually came off pretty well. Now we'll have to go back and look for to ensure that there are 4 wires for each tab. Because remember, Super 2 armatures are double wound with 2 wires per each pole. So you don't have a single from each side, you'll actually have 2 from each side connecting to each tab. So you could very easily have 1 break on you, but 3 still be there. And if that 1 is broken and not making contact, it will impact the armature's performance significantly. Quick note, if you're ever testing a Super 2 armature and you're looking to measure continuity between each of the tabs, note that if one reads between 4 and 4.5 ohms, that the other 2 are going to be good. So theoretically, you shouldn't have to test but one. Now there may be a slight variance, maybe 0.1 to 0.2, that could fluctuate as you test each, as the probes, contacts may be dirty and varies between the 2, or just the method and how in which you're testing it. But ultimately, if you have a broken wire on any single pole, that is actually going to change the resistance and make 2 read less than the 3rd. And so you will not have any poles at that point that read in the 4s. You may have some that read in the 5s, and then possibly one that reads in the 6 range. And that's going to be one that there's a broken wire between it and a neighboring comp plate. That's just a single broken wire. So you could actually still have that armature perform and run in a chassis. So as you look for eBay with these armatures and trying to determine if they're good or not, if someone says they've been tested and run, doesn't necessarily mean that it is ohming correctly and that all the wires are connected. You could very easily have one that is potentially broken. So now that we've got the wires disconnected, given that the tabs that hold the comp plate onto the armature itself are almost a hook type design and not the straight design as you would traditionally see on a red or green armature, mean green armature, you have to bend them back. But also remember from the first video armature restoration we did that the center hole on the comp plate for Super 2 is actually drilled for the exact same size as the shaft down the center of the armature. So when placing it back on, you're not going to place it in the wrong spot. And when you bend those tabs out, you don't have to be as critical about where they go, just as long as they make good firm contact on each of the 3 tab areas. And then if you're somewhat hesitant, you could put a drop of super glue on them just to make sure that it's not going to move on you. For me, I found that just folding them back over, putting a slight bit of tension on them seems to work very well, and I've never had any issues with them moving or coming loose. Because we're trying to save the windings, we want to be ever so delicate about bending these tabs out. We don't want to take a chance on breaking a wire on the windings themselves, which would then force us to have to either rewind or do some type of repair to the windings to get the proper length back on that particular pole. It's critical that the length or amount of turns that are in each pole are extremely, extremely close to each other, because that will affect the ohm resistance across any given pole. Now that the plate is removed, you can see that the windings underneath are actually quite clean. But this dark copper versus light copper discoloration is a good indication of a lot of heat cycles and age, and also informs whoever's working on it that the wires will be rather brittle. So now that we've got the plate off and set that to the side, it's time to take a closer look at the actual wires and see what, if any, repairs have to be made to try to save these original windings. Don't forget that if you'd like to be updated on the latest releases on the videos that I'm making on this and other series, to make sure to like this video, hit the thumbs up, and also subscribe, so that way you're notified when new releases and updates come out within the series, and also new videos as well. Yeah, it looks like we've got some that survived and some that did not. Now, the ones that generally wind around and are the very last winds to go on each pole, if for some reason those are broken, you can unwind them a single wind, and that's not going to impact the performance or the resistance nearly enough to be able to tell on an ohm meter. Now, if you had to go 3, 4, or even 5 winds, that could potentially be a problem. But for a single wind, it gets you enough extra wire to where it's sufficient to be able to reattach when that time comes. It's the inner wires where you first start winding on a single pole that are very difficult to deal with, and that if they are broken, can sometimes be pulled out from underneath, but very, very rarely. In our case, we may be able to salvage what we have, given that it appears that a couple of those inside wires are indeed broken. Trying to take a good look here and see just exactly how many are broken and what our options are for getting enough wire to wrap around the new tabs. Yep, definitely not enough on these shorter ones here. We're going to have to do some work on these. Be sure to stay tuned and subscribe so you can see how that progress goes in the upcoming videos. What I typically do here is I try to get these separated. So if you have, again, those dual windings, if they're attached to each other, try to get them separated and work on them one at a time. We're trying to add some extension on, so we'll want to try to re-tin those wires. Now, we know because they have some solder already on them that they've been cleaned a little bit, so we'll want to touch that up some. And then the idea would be to put just a little bit of solder on them, tin them, and then hopefully the new extension wires do the same, where they'll attach to each other. All you have to do is make that connection for that current to be able to transfer. And because it's right at the very, very tip, it'll almost be at the tab itself. So in theory, we're really only adding maybe 1/8 of an inch of wire, while the extensions, while we add them on, will likely be 3 or 4 inches. What will actually truly extend to be able to make contact with that plate once we put it back on will just be 1/8 to 3/8 of an inch. You can see here I'm having to unwind the outer winding one loop. That's going to give us enough material to be able to reattach that plate. Now, if you have some that have been super glued down, as you probably should if you're going to actually be playing with or racing with these armatures, it can be a bit tricky. If the super glue is older, generally they'll come off relatively easily, but if it's pretty fresh, they may bond pretty well. So just be very gentle as you try to uncoil them. You don't want to take a chance on breaking it in the middle, and then the wire is so tiny it becomes really, really hard to see, and so you could damage additional windings around that pole while you're trying to find the wire that just broke off when you were trying to pull back that single winding wire. Just grabbing a bit, just trying to be ever so gentle, and it looks like this one did have a touch of glue on it, but they came off there and unwound nicely. All right, we've made some pretty good progress. I think we've got a clear vision of what we need to do to try to get this thing back into shape. Trying to look at these things through glasses while trying to look around the camera to try to record this video for you guys is always a bit of a trick. Just want to make sure it's not hanging anything and take a chance on breaking those wires. That would be bad news. Gotten those unwinded on that particular pole. So the longer lengths that you're seeing now, extending past the armature, are going to be the outer winds for each pole. It's the inner winds that we're going to have to spend a bit more time on. So as this first episode comes to a close, appreciate you guys watching. And don't forget, hit that thumbs up, hit that little bell. That way you'll get notified. And stay tuned for the next episode.